Okay, Mr. Sam, shall we start right now? Because it's already 30:35.
Yes,
Okay,
go.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Roshafika Venturously from Center of Instructional Resources and E-Learning. Today we are presenting, sorry, today we are presenting the UDAS UMP Digital Assessment System for Safe Exam Browser for Online Exam from Mr. Sam Suresh. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any question during the presentation, please type them into the question into the comments. So after that, I will read to Mr. Sam Suresh the question that you will be asked. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to Mr. Sam Suresh, our presenter today, for present the webinar. Thank you, Mr. Sam. You can start right now.
All right, thank you, admin. Very good afternoon, everyone. Uh, happy to see all of you again. So I guess some of you have attended my session, I think 2 months ago, about course creations and so on in general. So today, I guess the topic is very specific about Safe Exam Browser. So we'll look at how Safe Exam Browser works and how you can use Safe Exam Browser in your teaching using Kalam or Moodle. So just before we dive into this, just a quick question. How many of you are already using Safe Exam browsers? Okay, please specify in the chat. You can just let me know in the chat so I have some idea like how many of you are already using it. Otherwise, I will start from very scratch what Safe Exam browser is. Okay, no, never. All right, so let's start with some basic what is Safe Exam browser. So basically, Safe Exam browser is a browser which is just similar to your Google Chrome, right? So you use Google Chrome. It's a computer software. That means if you want to use Safe Exam browser, you have to ask your students to install a software on their device. Okay, so this is something I would say you need to do with extra careful, because if you misconfigure it, it might lock your student's computer. They have to hard reset their computer. Then something else can go wrong, right? So therefore, I will show you two options how you can use Safe Exam browser, whether with a configuration file or without a configuration file. Both option works fine to conduct exams, but if you use a configuration file, you can control what your students can do while taking an exam. If you don't use it, if your students smart enough to figure out that they can reconfigure their Safe Exam browser, they can simply reconfigure it in a way that it allow them to do several things. So first of all, Safe Exam browser is a browser similar to Google Chrome or Mozilla Firefox or Safari. These are the browsers you usually use in your computer, right? So now this is an additional software that your students have to install on their device. You also have to install on your device to if you want to do some extra configurations. So if you have Safe Exam browser installed on your computer, now you can configure your exams, to follow the settings that you have created in the Safe Exam browser. So what exactly Safe Exam browser can do? Let's look at the features. Students will only be able to, attempt the quiz if they are using Safe Exam browser. That means if your students are using what we call Google Chrome, for example, right? They can't take the exam. The system will say, oh, you have to go back and install Safe Exam browser in order to take this exam. Okay, why we ask student to install Safe Exam browser is that we want to control what's happening on the computer. So technically, you can't control remotely from a browser, from your Kalam e-learning, you want to control what is happening in your student's browser remotely, you can't do that unless you have some software installed on their device. Similar to Zoom, right? We are using Zoom. I can share my screen. You can see my screen. You can see my PowerPoint and so on. Why? Because I have this software installed on my device. So unless you install something on the device, you can't control remotely. But what you are trying to do now is you want to control so that your students don't Google or don't copy, don't paste anywhere while they are taking an exam. So student will only attempt the quiz if they're using Safe Exam Browser. Second point, the browser window won't have a URL. That means they can't really go somewhere, some random website or some answer website to search for answers and so on. They can also go back or go forward. This can be controlled. That means they will only looking at your exam interface, which is Kalam, for example, and they can't go anywhere else. The third point, Safe Exam Browser cannot be closed until the exam is finished. Okay, again, this is optional. You can configure in a way that they can close anytime they want, or everyone sit the exam at the same time and you control, you give them a password. Okay, you want to close the exam? Okay, this is the password 123. You may close the exam now. Okay, that is how Safe Exam Browser works. If you don't provide the password, they can't really what we call control, or they can't really close the exam, right? So that is the third point. And moving on to the fourth point, which is about switching to other applications. Sometimes, yeah, they are taking exam and your students want to record it. They want to screen record it so that they can share it with the other friends, for example, right? Or they can share it with someone else. So this will be prohibited as well. That means they cannot run any screen recording application or any application that will capture the screen during virtual machine. If you're familiar with virtual machine, they can't run exam in virtual machine, and then they record the whole screen. So they provide this video to the friend. This is the exam, these are the answers, and so on. They can't do this. Switching to shortcut keys such as window tab, to swap between different screen and so on will not work. They can't print, they can't copy. Clipboard will not work. Browser menus are disabled. They can only look at application that you allow. If you allow them to go to YouTube, they can go for it. Otherwise, they can't even go to YouTube. Spell checking dictionaries also disabled because if you're there writing an essay, we don't want the system to do automatic spell check and so on. So that is what Safe Exam Browser can do. So pretty much, uh, I can't really demonstrate in a live now to show you how it works because if I launch Safe Exam Browser on my device now, my device will be locked. That means my Zoom will be automatically closed. Everything is done. But I can remotely access my colleague's computer and I can show it some part of it, but not taking the exam itself. That's the whole point of having Safe Exam Browser. So if you use Safe Exam Browser in your exams, it will lock your student's PC and they can only take the exam and they cannot do anything else. What if your student have two computers? They still can do that. Yes, you can't prevent them from doing that from their phone or from secondary device and so on. But what Safe Exam Browser control is the main device itself. Even though they have secondary device, they can't copy and paste, right? They have to type it out the whole thing if they want to Google for answers and so on. So that will take a lot of time. Probably you have a test which actually a time test. That means you have a limited time for them to attempt. So that is the whole point of using Safe Exam Browser. Prerequisites. If you want to use Safe Exam Browser, you have to make sure your students already install the Safe Exam Browser on their device. If they're using Windows, Mac, Safe Exam Browser support Mac or Windows. So these are only two environments supported now. You can ask your students to, sorry, you can ask your students to install this application before you begin your exam, right? Because probably they need internet connection, download. They sometimes they need administrative access to install on your device. So it's a good idea if you are implementing Safe Exam Browser in your classroom or in your exams. Please inform your students maybe several days before you start your exam, and I will always create a mock exam. I mean, I will create a test exam. I will ask them, go to Safe Exam browser and test it out whether you can take this exam. If you can take this exam, then you can also take the production exam, which is the real exam. So yeah, in one way, I can make sure that users are able to use the Safe Exam browser, or it is properly installed on their device. So if since this is first time, let's say many of you using Safe Exam browser, I will recommend you to create a dummy course and then ask your students to submit something to make sure everything works exactly like the production environment. Otherwise, you might have some hiccups, when the real exam is running. Someone probably call you and say, oh, I can't see the exam. I can't access the exam. My browser is crashed, and so on. So now you have asked them to test, and they already tested. They already give feedback that they're able to access, with assumption that it works for everyone. So to answer Ahmad Mahfouz Ghazali question in the chat, whether can be installed on the mobile phone, Safe Exam browser is available for iOS. That means it can be installed on iPad, but not on Android. So Safe Exam browser is not available for Android, as far as I know. It is not. So it is available for Mac OS, which is MacBook, Apple MacBook, or Windows laptop, or iOS. iOS referring to mostly for iPads actually. When you run exams on iPad, you can use that, or iPhone. It will work on iPhone as well, but not Android. So it is not intended for mobile use, to be honest, but I've used this when I create an exam like 4 or 5 years back for one of the European Union for exams. They use iPad, so that's where this project is funded by European Union, for your information. So SCB is a free software. um, it's not intended for mobile use actually. So preferably if you know that some of your student will be attending from mobile and they don't have a laptop, probably you should not use SEB in that case. Okay, so I already explained what is Safe Exam Browser. It is a software you need to install on your computer. And why we want to use Safe Exam Browser? We want to limit what your students can do during exam. We don't want them to Google. We don't want them to copy, paste, and so on. So if you ask me, Sam, students still can have secondary device and do all these sort of things, right? Yes, they can do it, but you can imagine how much time it will take, right? They have to copy the whole sentence, put on Google, they need to type it out. So this will take a lot of time and it's not practical. It's not, I mean, in reality they can't do that if it is a timed exam and so on. So, and as well as we don't want the content is leaked anywhere to the outsiders, so we want them to prevent them from copy. So that is the benefit of using Safe Exam browser. Any questions before I move on? If you have question, feel free to unmute to ask me, or you can post it on the channel as well. No? Okay. So let me move on.
So sorry,
Yes.
Mr. Sam.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm Mohaimin. Just to ask. Okay. Uh, what if they share their screen? I mean, they mirror their screen to another device or smart TV, for example. Then someone browse the final exam. Then he or she asks the answer lah for their partner, for
Yeah. This
example.
this is not allowed in the newer version of SCB as well. So if you have multiple output for your display, right?
Yes.
You can't take the exam.
Oh, okay.
Hmm.
Okay. Thanks for your answer.
All right. So this, I mean, I have come across this. Some student was contacting the lecturer and say, "Oh, I have configured everything as per what you said, but now I can't really take the exam." So when we dig deeper, we found that he have two monitors, and he said he switched off one monitor also. I mean, he's just turned on one monitor. All right. In that case, the system will not allow the student to take the exam as well. This happened to one of the students from one or other university that I managed. So um, from my understanding, how the system works is that if you have multiple display connected to one system, you can't take the exam. Okay, I'll move on. If you have questions, feel free to, put in the chat, or feel free to stop me anytime. You can ask
Right.
questions.
Mr. Sam, this is Lim. Just to ask regarding the multiple display output, right? Says that the students have dual screen, two screens, right?
Mhm.
Just now you were mentioning about if he or she duplicate the screen,
Yeah.
he cannot use the SEB. But how about if the screen is extended?
Mm, I mean, even if you have extended screen, the thing is attached to your hardware. You see, so the code will basically check how your output is. So if your output is actually being splitted somewhere, and the system will technically, your operating system will know that you have two display. If you go to right click and personalize your display, it will show you have two display, extended or mirroring. It's the same thing. It will still detect you have two display. So in that case, it will show a blank SAB. I mean, in your SAB, you don't see the exam interface. You'll just see it blank. Sadly, there's no specific error message will be displayed. So I did not test this out myself personally, but this is from a feedback I got from students because he were raising up the technical support to us because he said he follow everything, but he can't see that. He already switched off the other monitor. Then we find the system detects there's two monitors. So that's the case in a nutshell, that you can't have, extended display or duplicate display. Um,
Understand. So meaning to say, if the students are currently working in using two screens, right? Before we can start the exam, we have to ask them to configure in such a way that he only use one monitor, right?
Correct. So,
Correct. Understand.
this sometimes can be very challenging because your students might have a lot of different configuration, right, in terms of hardware.
Mm-hmm.
So that is why it's always a good idea to create a mock exam and ask them to take it. So from
Okay.
that,
Understand. Thank you.
coming. Okay, how about student need to use an online app such as online DB? Yes, you can configure that to allow that such exceptions. Okay, so let me move on to the next section. So how do we configure the SEB? So there's two ways to configure SEB. The first way is you use manual configuration. Manual configuration is much more easier to configure, and you can, I mean, it takes less efforts. You can configure it fast, and you don't need any specific tool to configure it. But then if you do a what we call manual configuration, if your student's smart enough, they can override that configuration. There are, if they really know how to, go to the tool and reconfigure it, and because at this point of time, Moodle doesn't support encrypted configuration files. That is really a waste of, of setting a safety measure which is available in SEB, but it's not available in Moodle. That means when you use SEB with Moodle, you can't use that configuration protections. So that means if you protect your configuration, the system will ask for a password, which means you need to give your students a password. Therefore, let me show you how to do this manual configuration first. So let's say we are configuring a course. Let me share my screen so you can see my column screen. Yeah, so I'm in your e-learning now. And let's say this is one of the course that I'm configuring here in the topic 4. I'm adding one of the course, one of the quiz. And right, so there is a section, as you can see, in the past, this is a experimental feature, which means you need to configure it outside and use a lot of external tools to get this done. But now from version 3.8 and above, it is already built in within Moodle Core. That means you can simply set here, which is configure manually. So this is the first option I'm talking about, configure manually. And the second option is, okay, someone annotating. So let me just remove the annotation feature for others. Okay, please don't annotate my screen. Okay, I'm not working with students, right? All right. So as you can see now, the first option is configure manually. So this is allow us to configure our settings here, right here. So you don't have to, you don't need any specific tools. You just go ahead with all these settings and you got your SCB configured. So let's look at what are the settings we have. Okay, so I'm talking about the first option now. I will move on to the other options later. So show safe exam browser download button. Yes, you want to show that. So if your student forgot to download, the system will show them a button. They can download that browser, install it. Let's say they log in using Google Chrome to take exam, and the system will show, hey, you need to have safe exam browser. Download it and access from there to take this exam. And show exit save exam browser button configured with this quick link. So if users going to this link, the browser will automatically, quit. For example, thank you, your exam is now over, something like that. Okay, this is optional. You don't really have to use this unless you know how URL or one specific URL that students goes and it quit the browser. Ask to confirm quitting, enable quitting SCB. You can always enable to quit the SCB, or you can set a password. For example, if you want to close the exam, let's say we are starting the exam, everyone at the same time. If you want to close the exam, why you are closing? Probably you have some reason why you're closing. One, it could be a technical error. Secondly, you're closing because you want to Google something and then you want to reopen, you want to continue where you left off. You want to do that. That's why we don't want to allow them to quit SEB. So allow, but then we give a password. It means we are taking exam at the same time. So it means everyone will end the exam at the same time. When you end, I give you a password, you can close the exam. They need this password. When they close the browser, the system will ask this password. Without this password, they cannot close the browser. But let's say you're not, running exam at the same time for everyone. You are running exam different time for different, or you have a time frame. Take this exam within today, right? In that case, it's not reasonable to set a password. Don't set a password, so user can finish the exam. They can quit the browser. Okay, but allowing quitting the browser without a password, risking that student can just quit, go to Google something, open browser again, continue here. But opening and closing is not that fast, like what I mentioned. It takes some sort of loading, configuring, so that will take about 10 seconds to open, or 20 seconds, or depending on speed of your device. So it is a slow process actually to open and close. And reload, maybe yes, we want to allow users to reload. Sometimes they come across technical error, something frozen, we want them to reload. In some exam, we don't allow them to reload depending on the structure of exam. Show the taskbar, the reload button, show time, show keyboard layout, yes. Wi-Fi control, yes, please. Because your students probably want to disconnect and connect to different Wi-Fi. Enable audio control. If you have multimedia, make sure you enable it. Mute on startup, means when the video play, it will be muted. Student need to turn on. Spell checking, no. Enable URL filtering. If you say yes, then you can filter what is allowed and what is not allowed. For example, this is filtering embedded content, no. But for URLs, you can specify some rejects. For example, something like this: example.com/star. Star means it can be anything. So someone mentioned earlier, can I allow something online DB or something, right? Let me see. Mm, online GDB. So it can be, if your URI is onlinegdb.com, so you can always add, like, you probably need to copy that. I mean, I'm not sure it's HTTP or what. So onlinegdb.com/star, for example. Right. So you can simply click this this question mark to see different formats, and this should be in a single quotation mark like this. Um, as well as I don't use this. If I want to configure, I will use the second option, which is upload my own config file, because it give me more option to configure. All right, that means but generally they're very much limited what student can do online if you're using SCB. So you might want to test it out by yourself, whether this SEB works for your exam, especially if you allow them to go somewhere and to get something during exam. So that's all the control you have for configure manually. So configure manually means you just configure all your settings here. That's it. Now, if the student want to take the exam, the system will ask for Safe Exam Browser. It's installed on their device. Once it is installed, they should be able to start the exam and complete the exam. If they are coming from Firefox or Google Chrome, the system will prompt and it will display that you need to use Safe Exam Browser in order to access this exam. Okay, and the system will use these settings, means the system will allow this, whatever you have configured, everything else will be automatically blocked. So that is a manual configuration, which in many cases, this is the best option for many lecturers because you don't need to configure anything manually. But like I said earlier, if your student smart enough, to maneuver this configuration, they can do so actually. So in that case, you can use the second option, which is upload manually. Any question for configure manually before we move on to the second option, which is upload a config file?
Sorry, Sam, you were saying that if the students close the can quick and then they can rejoin back the exam.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So what would be the meaning if they can rejoin back the exam, they exit, they can probably just search Google or whatsoever and they rejoin back.
True. So that is why I said if you don't want to allow, and given that you are running exam at the same time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you set a password so the student can't quit it. If they want to quit, probably they need to call you. I need to quit because there's emergency, something goes wrong or whatsoever. Then you give them a password to quit. Otherwise,
If they have the password, they quick, and then are they allowed? Will they be able to join in again?
yes, it is just like your quiz now. How it works now. I'm starting your quiz now. I just switch off my computer. I turn it on. I can still continue from where I left over, right? Because the time is still available. I mean, the time is still running. So as long as I complete within 1 hour 30 minutes, I can quit as many times as I want, and I can resume from where I left over. So it is allowed in the normal Moodle without SAB. So the same case when you use SAB as well.
Okay, understand. Thanks.
Hi Sam,
Yeah.
I'm Rosha. I have two questions actually, but and actually I used this SEB last semester during my final exam, and I did your suggestions to do the mock exam or mock test to foolproof the configuration of the SEB, and yes, I can say it worked. But my question, because I already done it once or twice, I would say, I have difficulties where I want to integrate some online kind of platform where I want to do the proctoring with my students. I tried to integrate with Microsoft Team, but it didn't work. So I have to switch to Google Meet. But the thing is, Google Meet only can accommodate 100 students maximum. As for my case, it's okay lah because I had students number of students that less than 100. But for those courses that have more than 100 would be difficult for that. So how is that? I need to put on the expression allowed the link of the MS Team link that I need the student to access during the exam using SEB.
You
Can
mean
they?
allow Microsoft Teams, is it?
Yes, yes.
Okay, for Microsoft Teams, that's a computer software, you see. So you
I
can't use
see.
configure manually. You need to use the second option, which is allow upload configuration file, and then you can configure that to run specific program on the computer, such as Microsoft Teams.
Okay, that was why it didn't work during that time lah, because it's a software. It's not a like a Google Meet. It's not a software, right? It's a embedded on the browser. Is it?
Right, because Google Meet
Okay.
have a URL which you can whitelist, but Teams, it's a software, so you need to whitelist the software itself.
Okay, okay. That one I think maybe after this you can show us how to do that.
Sure.
Okay, and a second question, since I already asked my students to download and configure the SCB on their browser, do they need to reconfigure the SCB every time they need to take exams on different courses? Such as if I ask the student to configure the SCB for my course, and they took another course which taught by other lecturers and want to use SCB as well, they need to reconfigure SCB and again,
Okay.
or just leave it as only configure once and they can use it for any courses they took on Moodle.
Okay.
Okay.
Basically, yeah. Okay. Basically, once they have configured, I mean, they don't configure anything. So just for the rest of you, your student don't configure anything. They just install their Safe Exam browser, and you give them a file. It is called a configuration file. They open that file, their computer get automatically configured. Okay. So I'm not sure, Miss Rose Hazliza, did you use that file to configure their device before this?
Uh, because I don't know if other lecturers did this, but for me I did for my course, my teaching course last semester.
No, my
So
did you give them a file to configure their device?
no, I just use the configure manually.
Okay, when you use configure manually, that's fine. So that this is okay. It's a safer setting. That means it will not mess up with your computer, right? But if you use a manual configuration, automate, it is upload. I mean, this one is not really manual configuration lah. Option one, although it's called configure manually, it's called some sort of auto configuration. Okay, the second option is upload a config file. This is a much more manual configuration, but much more secure way to run exams. It is not required. If you're not sure what you're doing, you should not do this because you might misconfigure your computer, your student computer. In that case, they can take your exam, but they cannot take others' lecturer exams. Okay, because the system already pre-configured the device to take only one that specific exam. So this one is I mean, much more flexible option. It's difficult to configure, require configuration tool. You need to install Safe Exam browser on your device. More option to control. You can also use exam keys. That means you need to make sure your student using the same configuration in order to exam to start. All right. Earlier option, your student can simply use any configuration as long as it follow all this setting, they can take the exam. But with this option two, which means you will choose yes, upload my own config, right? If you choose this, with this option, it will configure your student's device, right? Once it is configured, if someone else want to configure it again, yes, the system will automatically reconfigure it. But if one of the lecturer misconfigure it, then they have to reset the device. There is a tool to reset the device as well. So it became a bit more complicated here because one student might be taking different exam from different lecturers. So we have to make sure all lecturer from UMPs are aligned to use same setting, so it will not conflict the student's device, right? Otherwise, you will come across that issues. So let me just demonstrate how to do the manual configuration. Rajlan, can you show that? I'm gonna show that from let me see. There's audio open. Okay, let me try again. Okay. Okay, Rezlan, can you off your Okay, Rezlan, can you off your mic and your sound? Otherwise, we will have that echo back here. Let's try that again. Test one, test two. Okay, you have off that now. Okay, so let's go to the start menu and show them. So, but just before that, let me share the screen. Okay, can everyone see this screen? Okay, can everyone see this desktop?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Thank you. So I'm just remote to other device to show this because I'm using a Mac. The configuration is different here compared to the configuration that you have. Let me just close all the WhatsApp annoying notifications. Okay. All right. So from here, if you install the Safe Exam browser on your device and you search for SEB, so there's two tools actually comes with the browser. So when you install Safe Exam browser, you will get these two other tools. First tool is called as SEB configuration tool. The second tool is called SEB reset utility. So this tool is for teachers or lecturers to configure your student configuration, to create a configuration file. So we can use this file to configure your student SEB later. And this tool is for your students. Let's say a different lecturer giving different file and it messed up their computer. They can use this tool to reset their device. So let me go to the first tool, which is configuration tool. Okay, when you open configuration tool, this is what you will see. So the first setting you need to do in the general is you need to copy and paste your exam URL here, right? So let's say I'm going to run an exam and I already created an exam. So I go to the browser. Oops. And so let's say, let me go to my dashboard. Okay, so this is an exam, SCB file, and this is an exam. So you go to your exam and you copy this URL. This is the exam URL. Copy this and you need to paste it here. That means the moment your students open this configuration file, they will directly go to your quiz, which is your Moodle quiz. And from there, we can configure several other settings here, such as this is config file. We will come to this lastly after we have done every other tabs. User interface, whether we want to allow them to have full screen or touch optimized. If you're running, if you're running exams in the touch iPad or iPhone, then you go touch optimize. Otherwise, go to user browser window. You can also go for full screen. That means they cannot control the size and so on. It will be full screen. Enable browser window toolbar. You want to enable maybe some of the menu bar and other information. I will not enable anything for that. Show the taskbar, show the side menu, show the Wi-Fi. Yes, probably you want to show the Wi-Fi if they want to reconnect to different networks. And these are audio control. You can show the audio control. You can set the volume on the device as well. So it's a good idea to show the audio controls. If you have audio, spell checker are disabled by default. You can turn it on if it is required for you. Browser, more setting about the browser such as width, height, user agent, and so on. You can leave all this as it is. So it doesn't require to make any changes here. Download and upload. If you want to control, allow student to download or upload files. I will leave it on because sometimes they want to download the configuration file because they have not downloaded. So sometimes you want to ask them to upload something. So just leave it on. Exam itself, we will come back to this exam after we finish saving this file. For some reason, these tabs are not in a proper order. So applications, This is where you can allow some application, allow switching to third-party applications. Um, you need to click choose application, and you need to choose Microsoft Teams, which not sure where it is. Should be under Microsoft maybe. Teams, no. Is it program files, not program 86 Teams? Okay, it's not there. Maybe we need to find out later which, where exactly it is installed. Let's say in my example now, I want to allow them to access iSpring Presenter application. So I go to this iSpring Presenter launcher and open. See now on Windows, I allow them to access this application. Um, you can also, add again one more, and you choose to be Mac OS X. So this is how you allow your student to access some specific application. Someone asked about Microsoft Teams. If you want to allow Microsoft Teams during exam, this is how you do it. So this step pretty much you want to permitted process. Permitted means you allow them. Prohibited process by default, so automatically you see Teams is here. Teams is under prohibited. So you might want to uncheck that because you want to allow Teams. If you uncheck, it's not prohibited, but by default everything is prohibited, so it's a good idea to add that here as well, as a permitted process. And you can see Zoom and many other applications are in this list. It's all blocked by default, and everything else is blocked technically. Network, this is if you are using much more advanced, you use some specific certificate, to access the exam and so on, or proxies. Let's not to look into this. Okay, then if we look at security, um, disable app switching when startup, force installation application folder, allowed to use, this is Mac specific setting, this is Windows specific settings. So this setting is pretty much already controlled everything. That means your student can't do many of the things that lead to copy paste and so on. This is even the next level, which you want to enable switch users and so on, using control alternate and delete, which also not required. That's not the whole point of using SEB, is we don't want them to switch. And these are some keyboard shortcut whether you want to allow or not. So when you are already configure all these tabs, next steps, go to config file, save setting as, and you say this is UMP setting 001, right? And you save it somewhere, save. All right, you already save it. Now you need to go to your exam. I forgot to do something just now. In the exams, you're supposed to check this checkbox. Check this checkbox. And then you go to save as again. I'm going to just save as again one more time. And let's say I'm going to save UMP002. Okay, saved. So now you go to the exam and you need to copy this browser exam key. You need to copy this key. That's all for the configuration. That means now we already configured it and we copied this key. Okay, again, let me just repeat that quickly. I have very limited time to show you around this. So we just got about 12 minutes left. So let me show you how this works. First, you put your URI where your exam is, and then user interface, nothing to configure, browser, some additional options you want to configure, whether you want to allow downloads or uploads. Exam, you check this checkbox and you need to copy this after you save the file. This might change when you change any setting. So be careful with this ID. This ID will change when you click anywhere. So application, you need to allow which application you want to allow, or everything else is prohibited activities. Network, security, registry, hotkeys, and finally go to config, save as, and you save somewhere that you can retrieve back that file. Saved. After it is saved, you go to your exam and you copy these keys, right? You copy these keys. Okay, from there, once you have copied that key, what you need to do from there is you need to upload the configuration file and the key to your Moodle. That means your Moodle will check whether your students using the same configuration that you created or not. How do we do that? Rajan, can you send me the key that I saved on your desktop just now? So you go here and change to upload my config file. Right? Upload my config file, and you drag and drop the configuration file that you save on your desktop. And then you need to paste the key here. This is the key, configuration key. That means now your system will check whether your student is using the configuration file you created with the specific key or not. If your student try to tamper the configuration, that means they open the configuration, want to edit back, they can do so actually, because we didn't set password for the configuration. Why we didn't set password? Sadly, Moodle doesn't support if you set a password for the configuration. It cannot read the file. Therefore, we didn't set a password. So your student can open the configuration tool to access all these settings, right? But if they tamper the configuration, this hash will change immediately. That means that file is invalid already. So your student can't really, tamper the settings. So that is why we copy. It's important to copy this. If you don't copy this, your student can just play around with the setting and say, allow Google Chrome and so on. Then the whole point of having ACB is compromised. That is how the second option works. Upload my own configuration file. You configure, you upload it here, and you set your browser key. Okay, next time if you want to edit back the setting, you need to copy a new browser key, because as I just explained just now, every time you reconfigure or you change a single point setting in the configuration file, the hash will change, the key will change, right? That means you need to re-upload that new key in your Moodle. So that is the second method. I mean, you have two methods to use configurations, Safe Exam Browser. Option one, manual configuration. Option two, upload a SEB configuration file. Exam keys are very useful because it can validate whether are they using the same setting you created or someone else already tempered it. If tempered it, the system will not accept that settings. They need to use your settings. Quick password, you can always use quick password, to prevent users to quit, go back to Google something, come back to Safe Exam Browser. And finally, troubleshooting. You might come across cases where your students say, my browser doesn't allow me to reconfigure it because some other lecturer have configured it. Instead of say to start this exam, they configure it in a way that to configure client, right? You'll see that option to configure client. You should not use that. Please do not use that. You should not configure your student computers, right? Don't configure the devices because that's technically their personal device. You should not configure it. All the setting you always use to start an exam. Don't configure your student laptop. Uh, it just happened when some lecturer accidentally configure the student laptop. Instead of starting an exam, they select configure client. In that case, you need to ask your student to reset, use the reset tool, right? Reset tool is very straightforward. Go to the tool, key in the username, run as administrator, and it will just reset all record from the student computer. That means reset to zero already. And then they can start to use again the new configuration that you will provide. Okay, so that is how Safe Exam Browser works. All right, so let me just revisit some of these questions. I saw TikTok video where students shared a tip. Teacher use Moodle and exam platform. She said even though the assessment is made available certain date and time, by manipulating time and date in her computer, student will be able to view assessment at their own preferred time. It depends how the time zone setup is work on their on the server. So if your server time zone is set to Malaysia, your Moodle time zone is set to Malaysia, the time zone actually it will follow the server time zone. So it does not follow student time zone. But sadly, some activities will follow student time zone, because that's the whole point of having time zone setting in the user profile. So to prevent this, what you can do is please ask your administrator, which is in this case, I think Mr. Sharizal, to restrict student or anyone cannot change their time zone. So the time zone is fixed for everyone, which is uh, UTC 8 plus 8. Okay, in this case, this time zone is actually referring to their time zone on their profile, not on their computer, right? If they change their computer time zone, this will not work. Actually, this will not work. Uh, the, the quiz will not open or whatsoever. You can try that out. This time zone actually referring to user profile time zone. So I think one way, I mean, to if you want completely prevent that kind of sneaky activities, you can ask your super admin to restrict time zone, so nobody can change their time zone on their profile. But the system will not check on your time zone on your computer actually. Okay, the system will check actually the server time zone on you. So there's no chances for your student to open the quiz before it is actually open. But other than quiz, some activities actually check student time zone, not the server time zone. Okay, any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Sam. So just now you were saying that we can ask the super admin to configure the time zone, right? The server time zone. Is that only can be done in Kalam?
Yeah.
If let's say we were conducting exam using some other platform, let's say Google Form or whatsoever, is that still can be done?
No, cannot. It can only
Cannot.
be done in Kalam, because in Google, I mean, Google Form is not secure. Student technically can see the answers, when they are replying, if you have an answer set in the Google Classroom. So in Moodle, it's secure the way that the answers are not carried to the browser until they submit everything to the database. The database will process the answers. So in a way, your student can't really cheat, but the tricks that you see in TikTok and elsewhere is actually for some other activities, not for the quiz itself. So the quiz will only open based on your student profile time zone or the server time zone, which is
Okay.
already set to Malaysia. But now your students still can change their time zone in their profile. If you go to profile and preferences, from there you can change your time zone. So if you want extra, I mean, security to prevent other activities accidentally, exposed, you can ask SOP admin to restrict people cannot change their time zone.
All right. Thanks.
Okay, looks like that's the only time we have for this time around. I hope you have got some idea about how safe exam browsers work. Go ahead, give a try. But please remember, when you are using a configuration file, which the second method I showed, you might accidentally configure your student's computer. So please do a lot of testing with your computer, your different computers that you have before actually you distribute the file to your students. Because if you end up, misconfigure 50 student computer, that's a headache for you to reset everyone. And reset also requires some escalated permission, will not work across all computers and so on. So when you use Safe Exam Browser, this will configure the computers, and you are technically configuring a computer which not belong to your institution. That means somewhat you're responsible to what's happening in your student's computer, right? If something messed up, you need to be responsible to fix it back. So my advice is always test differently, create 2 mock exam, use the configuration file across 2 different, whether it works or not. Everything works, then you roll out to your students. That's all.
Okay, thank you Mr. Sam. Is it ada para pensyarah yang lain ingin bertanya ke soalan lagi kepada Mr. Sam sebelum kita akhiri kita punya sesi webinar? Okey, kalau tak ada, kita akhirikan kita punya sesi webinar ni, dan saya ucapkan ribuan terima kasih kepada Mr. Sam kerana sudi meluangkan masa untuk sesi webinar pada hari ini. And kami daripada pihak Sirel mengucapkan terima kasih juga kepada para pensyarah sebab sudi join sesi webinar pada petang ini. Mr. Sam ada nak cakap apa-apa lagi?
Itu saja. Terima kasih semua.
Okay, so we end our webinar for today. All right, thank you everyone. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you, Mr. Sam and Cyril, and
Thank
you all.
Thank you
Terima
semua.
kasih dulu ni. Terima kasih.
Alright, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sam. Thank you, Mr. Sam and Miss Sam.